Hey guys, we've talked about how to punctuate and capitalize our quotations, which is a big part of what's hard about quotations, okay? But a lot of times, especially as you get older and you're writing a lot of different types of things, you're going to want to use quotations from other people in your own writing, okay? And there's just a lot of things to know in order to do that well, right? So first, let's talk about some of the situations where you might want to use quotations in your writing, okay? So first one, and this is probably the one that you're familiar with because you did creative writing in elementary school, when you're writing a story and you want to have dialogue between your characters, okay? Now, some situations that you might run into in middle school and high school and college where you want to use quotations, right? You're writing an informative essay and you want to include a quote about your topic. So, for example, say you're writing a biography of Martin Luther King Jr. and you want to include a famous quote from him, okay? Now, another time where this might happen is if you're writing a persuasive essay. Persuasive essay is an essay where you're trying to convince me of something, okay? And say you did some research about whatever your topic was. So think of like the 8th grade project presentations, right? They do research, they try to convince us of something, okay? So say you've done your research, you have your argument, and you want to include a particularly persuasive quote or a quote from an expert on your topic as evidence to support your claim, okay? Another situation where you might want to use quotes is if you're writing about a book or story or poem. Say I asked you to write about the theme of a certain short story we read, all right, and you include quotes from that book, story, or poem. Okay, so let's talk about how to include these quotes in our writing in a way that is effective and that makes our writing better. Okay, so number one thing, all right, most important thing to know. Quotes can never stand alone as their own sentence. You should always introduce your quote with an explanation of who said that quote. Always, always, always. That includes when it's like the hook for your essay. Okay, so for example, Gandhi said, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." Notice I didn't just put the quote as its own sentence. I said, Gandhi said. All right, or you can put the introduction second, like "Be who you are and say what you feel" is a famous quote from Dr. Seuss. But again, I can't just put the quote and put a period and leave it by itself. That's never okay. Okay? All right, now this one we've talked about, but just a reminder, make sure to introduce your quote with the appropriate punctuation, so a comma or a colon, unless it's very short or flows within the structure of the sentence. Okay? Now, a lot of times when people say next year in 7th grade, when you're writing a bunch of persuasive essays for me, and people are like, okay, I'm going to put this quote and this quote and this quote and this quote and this quote. And then it suddenly becomes like you have more quotes from other people than you have your own writing, okay? You don't want that, all right? So don't use a big, long quote when a short snippet of that quote works just fine, okay? So you want to use just what you need and no more. All right, so here's an example of me doing this badly, okay? Bad example. Eris is very angry about being left off of the wedding guest list and wants revenge. Thetis, King Peleus, brothers and sisters, here is your wedding gift from me, and may you forever regret insulting me by leaving me off the guest list. All right, this is a pretty long quote, right? Okay, here's a better example of using the same quote. Eris is very angry about being left off of the wedding guest list and hopes that the other gods and goddesses will forever regret insulting her. All right, the focus of my quote here was that Eris wants revenge, right? That's what I was saying here. So I only need to include that part of the quote where she's going to make them regret it. Okay, I don't need the whole quote. I don't need where she's like yelling people's names. That's not necessary. Okay. Second, also along with that, always make sure your quote adds something to your writing. If you don't need a quote there, you don't put one. Okay. So bad example, right? This is how we don't want to do it. Zeus had a sudden thought. Chorus 2 tells the reader, Zeus has an idea. You already said he had a thought. So again, including a quote telling me he had an idea is totally unnecessary. Okay. So here's a better one. Good example. Zeus had a sudden thought. Paris will choose which goddess is the fairest. Right? So now I'm telling you what Zeus's thought is. Right? So think of it like football. Okay? Whether you're familiar with football, but the basic objective is to get the ball down the field. Okay? So think of it like your introduction, okay? I kicked the ball a little ways down the field. All right, and then your quote should take the ball and move it across the field goal line. Okay, so you don't want to kick the ball and then just go and stand there and not move the ball any further. Okay, that's just wasting time. All right, so you might have noticed in this quote I used what's called an ellipsis. All right, if you don't want to use part of the quote, skip over it and add an ellipsis. That's what the dot, dot, dot is actually called. All right, if you just skip a few words, you use 3 dots. If you skip a sentence or more, you use 4 dots. Right? So the original quote that I used in this example was Paris, the lonely shepherd on Mount Ida, will choose which goddess is the fairest. I didn't need to include that information about the lonely shepherd on Mount Ida. That's not important to what we're talking about here. So I said Zeus had a son thought Paris, dot, 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 will choose which goddess is the fairest. So I skipped over that part. And again, that goes back to the, only use what you need part. Okay? Now, if you're using a quote to provide evidence for a claim or statement you made, you have to do what's called sandwiching the quote. And you'll hear me talk about the quote sandwich a lot over the next couple years. All right, but basically think of it like the quote is the meat of the sandwich, right? But if you go into your mom, say for lunch, and you're like, Mom, I'm hungry, and she just hands you a slice of ham, you're going to be like, that's not really what I wanted, right? You're going to want it with like some bread and some condiments, maybe some lettuce if you like that, okay? You need the other parts of the sandwich, all right? So, your quote sandwich. Introduction, right? We've already talked about that. Quotes can never stand alone. Quote, explanation, okay? So if you ever make some kind of claim or statement you're trying to support with a quote, you got to have the quote sandwich. Don't just give me the slice of ham, okay? So, example, Eris is a jealous and petty goddess. That's my claim or statement that I'm making, okay? At the wedding of Thetis and Peleus, she says, that's my introduction, may you forever regret insulting me by leaving me off the guest list. That's my quote. She then throws an apple labeled for the fairest into the crowd, leaving the goddesses to fight over it. The ensuing conflict gives Eris the revenge she so desired. That's my explanation. So I've explained how my quote, okay, goes back to support my claim. All right, so you must have that quote sandwich whenever you use a quote like that. All right, last thing, remember, always cite your sources. Cite means tell me where you got it from. So if you used a quote from somewhere, you need to tell me who said it, right? Again, that goes back to introducing your quote, right? And, if you did some research and you're using some source to back up whatever you're saying, you need to include the source in a bibliography, okay? We'll talk more about that later, but just something to keep in mind.